Doing well, thanks. Just want to kind of get your perspective first of all on how the day went, how the weeks leading up went, and where you ultimately decided to stay where you're at this point.
Yeah, it's been a busy week really leading up to the trade deadline. I think we were aggressive in a lot of conversations, trying to improve the team. We always want to put this team in the best position to win a championship, but ultimately didn't find a deal that had a net positive effect for sort of the short-term success of the team and the long-term, and those are both things we consider. But the work was put in. We all worked hard, spent a lot of time and talking to 29 other teams, had some good conversations, but ended up standing pat.
Go to Kyle Goon.
Hey, Rob. What is the state of the franchise's relationship with Russ? Obviously, there's been, I think it's fair to say, tension between him and the coaching staff on his role in games. What discussions have you had with him about kind of trying to get everything right for the remainder of the season?
I think one of the hallmarks of our organization is to be supportive of all the players that wear Lakers jerseys from 1 to 15. Our job as a front office, as a coaching staff, as teammates for the players is to support one another. I mean, that's one of the keys to success. And I've had several conversations with Russ since we acquired him in the trade, and have really appreciated those. As everybody knows, Russ is a big-hearted individual. He wants to win, and he knows winning with players as impactful and influential on the court as Anthony and LeBron are, that it's going to require sacrifices in his game and how he plays. And we've had discussions around other players that have gone through those similar processes. I was, as an agent, I remember when I represented Andre Iguodala, and he went from sort of being an all-star in Philly, was traded to Golden State, and played a different role there, but had to mold and shape his game and won championships. We all know some of the changes and sacrifices Kobe made in his career when he went from playing into the triangle. So those are processes. I'm not trying to ever compare players to players, but those are evolutions and processes that players have gone through. And Russ and I have had really great discussions around those. And I think the conversations have really been two-sided, with a lot of listening and dialogue on both sides. And I've really appreciated that about Russ.
Next, we'll go to Dan.
Hey, Rob. Good to see you. Can you kind of speak to the stability or that this, I guess, or instability, I mean, that this year has sort of been, whether it's guys in and out, speculation about Frank's job status, and I guess kind of where does everything sort of stand, today, now that we're through the deadline and no deals remain?
I think, stability is something that's at the fabric of everything we do here. And as we've said before, we don't pay attention to sort of outside noise. It's about what's going on in the locker room and what's going on upstairs. And we feel, very strong about staying supportive of one another. Those are the key qualities, I think, for success. I think it's important to remember that, the metric of success here is you win a championship or you don't. There's no middle ground. And we have to be on a pathway to put this team in a position to try to compete for and win championships. And that takes the support of one another. And I know that's going on internally, despite what others might say. And I think when it comes to finding success in a season of when a team is not winning, I think the most important action is for everyone to look in the mirror and be better. That includes the front office, it includes the coaches, it includes the players, is to look in the mirror and how can you be better in your job every day? How can you support the man or woman next to you and make them better each day? And that's really where our focus and energy and efforts are. It's not in, speculating on things happening on the outside of our organization.
Rob, just a quick follow-up, just to be clear on that. Do you anticipate Frank then being with you guys at least through the remainder of this season?
Again, consistent with that answer, Frank's our head coach, and we fully support Frank as our head coach, and we have to continue to support one another to find success.
Next, we'll go to Bill.
Rob, just more directly on Russ. Did you guys have conversations? Were you about trading Russ? Did you explore the possibility of what a trade for Russ might look like? And did you discuss with him the possibility of being on the move?
Yeah, when it comes to the Lakers and then the 29 other teams in the league, Bill, we want to be incredibly respectful of the confidentiality with trade discussions around any player 1 to 15 on our roster. It's just not fair to other teams to talk about discussions we have had or have not had. So we're not going to discuss specific players or specific teams and whether or not there were negotiations around them.
And then more broadly on just on the process of the deadline in general, you mentioned short-term interests versus long-term interests. Does the fact that you guys are 26 and 30 and the team is where it is, did that put a greater emphasis on the long-term interests of this team in terms of preserving those assets than you might have expected at this stage in the season?
I think you correctly point out, Bill, everything is a balance, right? I think every decision we make has to be contextualized by multiple factors, and it can't be just a decision about what is best for today or best for what happened, right after a loss. It has to be with the long term in mind and the short term. So we just didn't find a deal that we felt like made sense from all of those different perspectives. And we will be aggressive if we feel like there are roster areas to address. We still have the buyout market to see what materializes there. We've been successful in the past. Obviously, the 2020 championship, we added a player like Marquise Morris, who was influential, and we're going to continue to look for opportunities like that with the buyout market if there's ways to make the team better. And then we're hopeful that a player like Kendrick Nunn, who was slated to be our backup point guard and, is a great young player, we're hopeful to get him back. Right now that's slated for something, late in March, and hopefully that's the case where we could get a player of his talent back and integrate it into our lineup as we, make our run towards the end of the season and hopefully the playoffs.
Dave?
Hey, Rob. Given the stage of LeBron's career and the inherent kind of pressure that comes with the partnership, recognizing you're trying to shepherd the legacy of someone who's considered one of the handful greatest players of all time, is there any sense from your position, the front office's position, talking about accountability, that today you didn't accomplish your job or your goal in order to give him more supporting pieces for what's remainder of this season?
During the entire course of my tenure, you guys know, because I've said it before, I've been very collaborative with LeBron and Anthony, our captains, in terms of shaping the roster and making moves that make sense. And that continued with this trade deadline. And you can't force another team to present yourself with a deal that's going to make your team be better. That's up to them. And throughout this process, we had different things we looked at, and like I've done in the past, had conversations with LeBron and with Anthony about it. And I would say that there's alignment here, and that's all that matters.
Go back to Kyle.
Rob, you mentioned the buyout market, and obviously you guys have added guys the last 2 years. In terms of a roster spot for that, is the plan to kind of gauge who's available and then make a roster spot open once that happens, or are you guys looking in the short term to open a roster spot and then start the hunt, so to speak?
Yeah, I think the important thing there is, we have the full support of Jeannie and her family to make the team better if we see opportunities to do that. And obviously that the buyout market has to materialize itself before we can analyze those opportunities and whether or not they would upgrade our team or not. So there'll be a time and place for that.
Yvonne, do you have a question or any follow-ups from Beats? Go back to Dan.
Sorry about that. I'm yelling at my muted screen here. Rob, I'm curious, kind of, obviously there'll be time to reflect on decisions, down the road and stuff like that. But the way the roster is constructed in terms of basically a lack of middle class of salaries, right? Like you guys have a lot of minimum players. You have 3 really top end salaries. How much did that kind of handcuff you today as you tried to find something? Did you find that to be a barrier to making a deal?
As you pointed out, our roster is constructed with 3 all-stars. Of course, those players have max salaries. We have players like Talon and Kendrick who are more in the middle, and then the rest of the rosters are, as you pointed out, for the most part, minimum players. You can only work with the cards you have, and those were the cards we had, and it still allowed us to explore multiple things. I think last year at the trade deadline, we didn't make any drastic moves, and we had more, fungible pieces there. So it's not just about the pieces you have. It's whether that played a factor in, I don't know, but those were the pieces we had. We tried to do as much as we could with them, but much like last year at the trade deadline, ended up in a similar place.
Bill, will the follow-up?
Yeah. Rob, you guys obviously committed significant assets to bring Russ in. And, I think as was acknowledged earlier, it's been an uneven road for him. What are the reasons you think that it hasn't been a more seamless fit? And do you think that this can still be a successful partnership over the long term, over the remainder of his contract between Russ and the Lakers?
Yeah, I think if you took any 3 all-stars in the NBA and your body of work was, 15 games, I think that would probably be a small number of games to make any ultimate conclusions on.
Go to Mike again.
Hey, Rob, with the limited amount of time that LeBron and AD have both been on the court, not just this year, but kind of the second half of last season, how are you looking at the way to put guys around them and the whether that's what the structure and the composition of that is? And have you been able to evaluate this season in certain ways has that made it more difficult as you think about not just the rest of this year, but those 2 moving forward?
Yeah, I think we've shown an ability to be nimble on the fly. We've had some adjustments to our roster with bringing in Stanley Johnson, who's been great. Obviously, Austin Reeves was something that we did early, but I think we picked up Avery Bradley on waivers. So I think those additions from off-season moves have all been positive ones. And as I said before, Mike, we'll look now to the buyout market and see if a good player or 2 becomes available. But I think all of those guys have had a positive delta effect, and we'll look to do more if we can.
We have time for a couple more questions. We'll go to Dave.
So, Rob, obviously, we're all aware of the very real challenges that you guys had this year. But that said, with the injuries and COVID and the alike, how do you feel like they performed up to their potential up to this point? And when you hear things like one of your captains, LeBron, saying there's a fog around this team, what can the front office do to help clear that for the remaining 26 games before the postseason?
Yeah, I think my life philosophy, Dave, is if you're not having success or if you reach a hard period, you've got to look in the mirror and you've got to work harder and you've got to be better for the person next to you. And I think that's all of us, whether it's myself, whether it's a coach, whether it's a player, look in the mirror, be better, play harder, care more about the guy next to you. Those are all things that we can do. We can all be better every day. And I think if you're not finding success, that's the best road.
Bill and Mike, did you have another follow-up, or did you just forget to put hands down? Okay. All right. Any other questions, guys?
And 29 other teams in the league, Bill, we want to be incredibly respectful of the confidentiality with trade discussions around any player 1 to 15 on our roster. It's just not fair to other teams to talk about discussions we have had or have not had. So we're not going to discuss specific players or specific teams and whether or not there were negotiations around them.